Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hey everyone, and welcome. This is Felice Gerwitz with Vintage Homeschool Moms, and today we are going to have a very special guest. Today our topic is Homeschool, Headstart, Military Families. This is episode 475, and you can find today's show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Well, how do homeschool military families do it? And even if you're not a military family, do you want to give your child a head start in their educational journey? Well, surprise, surprise, it's not all about academics. But as a smart parent, which I'm sure you are, you already probably know this fact. The journey is not complete without an understanding of some life skills, such as making good decisions and having a strong faith. That is very important to me and to my guest. And I want to welcome our special guest today. And she is one of our, well, actually, she has two podcasts on the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. And today I welcome Crystal Niehoff. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, I'm excited to have you on. And you have worn many hats throughout the year. And so I want you to share a little bit about yourself with the listeners.
Okay, well, we're an active duty Army chaplain's family, currently stationed at Rock Island Arsenal, Illinois. Since we began homeschooling in the year 2000, we've graduated 3 from our homeschool with 2 more to go in the spring of 2023. My husband and I are the very proud grandparents of 5, and I'm going to share a secret. Just found out one more is on the way.
Oh, wonderful.
So excited. And I also homeschool my oldest granddaughter, Lexi, long distance, thanks to technology like Skype and texting, Google Docs and all that.
That's
and
wonderful.
Then my second daughter, Savannah, will start homeschooling her kindergartner this fall.
Oh, I love the homeschool legacy stories. I think that is so wonderful. And, one thing that you came into my life soon after I found out that my son was going into the military, and he is a second lieutenant, will actually report the end of July, where this is 2022 as we're recording this. And you are married to a military chaplain. So that was such a blessing that you came into my inbox and we had a discussion, and you talk to me about a podcast, and you now have historyforchristianteens.com, and you do this with your husband. So share a little bit about what that podcast is about.
So the History for Christian Teens podcast was really born out of my love and my husband's love for all things history. And then we also felt that we kind of forget that the Bible is a history book and there's so much we can learn from that. So we started by going through different characters from the Bible, and we will then move on from there into other stories of more modern day historical figures. But we take that and we not only learn about the person, the good and the bad, but what we can learn from them and the life application lessons that we can apply to our own lives. There's something we can glean from everyone that we can apply to our lives. Even from, we learned about Saul one time, and I thought, what can I possibly learn from King Saul and all his mishaps? But we learned about humility, the importance of being humble and realizing that it's God that does the work, not us. And pride goeth before a fall. So we can learn something valuable from anybody's life and then apply that to our own lives. So it's kind of history with a twist.
I love it. And that's the thing that makes it so unique. That's one of the reasons I was so interested in that. And then you've just launched the Military Homeschool podcast. And I was a guest recently on that one as well. And you focus there on homeschooling and military families. But I have to be honest, there's so much good information. I've listened in on your, some of your episodes, and you have such good information. It doesn't matter whether you're a military family or not. It just really pertains to really good homeschool advice. So share a little bit about that and why you decided to start that one.
Well, homeschooling, as we know, can be challenging for any family. But then when you add on military life, which is sort of like being on a roller coaster 24/7, lots of ups and downs. So really the mission and my heart for the Military Homeschool podcast is to bring information and guests to our listeners that are relevant to our unique lifestyle as military families. But we'll also cover topics that are common to homeschooling families. But then the unique aspects we'll cover are things like homeschooling during a deployment or a PCS, which means permanent change of station, which is a scheduled military move, and how to bond and spend time together before a deployment, which homeschooling really lends itself well to. That's unique to us as homeschoolers, rather than, we're not sending our kids off to public or private school all day. They get to spend time with dad before he deploys. And there is just so many things that make military life and homeschooling unique for us. So we'll cover those topics, learn about how others homeschool in their military life and learn from that as well. But my heart really is to just offer support and encouragement to homeschooling military families so we don't feel so alone. We'll get through it together.
Wonderful. I remember years ago, I hosted, we called it Mommy Jammies Night. So it started at 9 p.m. so that the people on the other coast could join us, and I remember one time we had a military family, a mom, they were stationed in Germany. And I don't even remember what time it was in Germany at that point in time, if it was like in the middle of the night or when it was, but she just really craved that connection. And so we really had, like a guest that was on that, had a very encouraging word. And so, it was amazing that, just exactly what you're saying. She was a homeschool mom and wanted that connection. And now, with the internet, there's so much more availability with things going on. And so that's wonderful. And a question I have, like, do many military families homeschool?
Well, the short answer is yes, amazingly. But I love statistics. So a slightly longer answer is I grabbed some statistics about that. And the National Home Education Research Institute says that there are currently an estimated 3.7 million homeschooled students in the United States, grades K through 12. And that number represents roughly 6 to 7% of the general population. However, what's so exciting is that the number rises dramatically among military families. According to the Blue Star Family's 2021 Military Family Lifestyle Survey, 13% of active duty families choose to homeschool their children.
Wow.
And that is nearly 2 to 4 times the proportion of children ages 15 to 17 that are homeschooled in the general population.
Wow. That's
and
wonderful.
Then add to that,
and there's more.
Numbers, is that 32% of active duty military spouses report that their child's education is their top family issue. And that of that, 38% state that they plan to continue homeschooling through high school.
That's amazing. And yeah, my kids very successfully homeschooled through high school. And I think, some of the things that we're going to talk about today will fit in with that. So when we talk about a head start, it can mean different things to different people. And in this instance, when I'm talking about a head start to your homeschool, no matter what time of the year it is, it means having a good plan and having at least some sort of, even if you don't like scheduling, because I know one of the things with homeschoolers is we're kind of a different brand of person. Like if you say you have to have a schedule, then they'll say, well, I don't want a schedule. But it can be a schedule or a routine. Okay. Kids like that consistency. I'm one that would say something like, oh, let's go to the park today. And I'd have one child who would freak out because that's not what was in the plan. So I had to learn that, with my children, even the ones that would say, yeah, that's great, that we had to have some kind of plan and consistency. And that was a way to not get behind. And also, we were prepared enough so that we could be confident in our own abilities. How many of you have ever said, if you've homeschooled for more than 1 year, raise your hand? And okay, of that group there, how many of you have thought near the end of the year, oh gosh, this was not a good year and we didn't cover anything? And I think one of the things that I did every year that really was helpful is we put together a portfolio, which was samplings of their work throughout the year. And then when I got smarter and didn't do it at the end of the year, which is a killer, and we did it as the year progressed, I would have the kids every couple of weeks pick out like their best math paper or their best writing assignment or whatever that was, whatever subject area. And, if it was history, I would just have them write a little paragraph about what was covered. Sometimes we would do things like that, and I'd put it on my marker board. And so those were things that we kept in their portfolio so that it wasn't even so much for them. It was for me so that I could go back and say, oh yeah, we did, so much this year. And okay, well, here was a hole, maybe we could do a little bit more with this academic topic. And so if you're confident as a parent, then you are going to be confident to continue on. I think when we lose our own confidence in our ability, that really doesn't help. And then the second part of it is academics are wonderful and they're important. And, yes, your child needs to be able to read and do math, even with the internet and audiobooks and so forth. But I think there's another aspect of it, and that is to prepare them mentally as well as spiritually, especially if you're a Christian. That is very important and takes center stage. And I think, all the academics in the world are wonderful, but they're nothing if you have a child who is self-centered, who's hateful, who, is the person that no one wants to be around and is a huge discipline issue. As parents, we can make a lot of excuses for things. It's the only way that we sometimes can survive. But as my husband, he's a lot of wisdom, and like he always says, when the kids were trying to convince us that they didn't do something wrong, and he would just say, "Really, son, what you're doing, or daughter, is you're lying to yourself. These are the facts. This is what happened, and what you're trying to tell me is an excuse, and it's also a lie." And so we learned. I mean, there were some days, Crystal, when I just stopped everything and we had to deal with the discipline issue, and so once we got through that, our homeschooling went really quickly. I'm going to be doing, actually, I just did a podcast. It's called Unruly Kids. It's episode 471. So you can look for that on the show notes on Vintage Homeschool Moms. But so one of the things that I'm going to address in that podcast is situations where we can nip things in the bud with our kids. And again, it takes, I have a lot of years of experience now. My baby's 21 at this point in time, and I have 8 grandkids. Yay for grandkids. But, it just is difficult to even educate a child if you don't have that discipline issue. So the first Head Start topic we are going to talk about is, it's wonderful to have a plan and to have the academics and to know what your curriculum is. But the first is dealing with the discipline issues in your homeschool. So do you want to help address that or add to that if you could?
I think in regards to discipline, and this is my personal opinion, but it's so important to remember that to look at it, the offense, whatever it was that they did wrong, through the eyes of a child. I can remember times that I got in trouble as a child and I didn't realize I was doing anything wrong. That child that goes out and is playing, this is one of my favorite things too, is to play in the mud. And then you bring that in, and I'm not thinking that I'm doing anything wrong. I was just exploring my environment. So I do believe in a lot of grace with your children, but also the importance of discipling your child before it becomes necessary to discipline. Discipline's always going to be necessary, but that discipleship beforehand is so important. And the younger you start, it's never too young, really, in my opinion, to start discipling, even as a baby, and you're holding them in your lap. And I love to read to my babies, and they love to hear your voice, and they don't understand. But over time, they start to understand, and they understand that they're in a warm, safe place with, mom's loving voice. And that's kind of the beginning of discipleship. And then you train them why they don't tell a lie, or why don't just say no and expect it to happen, but let them know the why behind it. Not to reason with your child all the time. We're not their friend, but I think that discipleship is, and really that's a root word of discipline. But I discipled my children when they're young, so that my 2 youngest are teenagers, but I have relatively few issues with them. And it's not that I was a great parent at all. I have many shortcomings, many flaws, and I'm sure they would happily name them all for you. But I also, it was important to me that when I did something wrong, when I overreacted, I would then also apologize to them and ask for their forgiveness. And so there's a respect there, I think.
I think that's beautiful, because that is really important. And I love what you said about discipleship. And I think, because I was going to ask you to share more about that, and you did. So thank you. But one of the things I did with my children, especially when we went out, was I prepared them ahead of time. I didn't do it to begin with. And then I was like, oh my gosh, my child just had a meltdown, and we need to not do that anymore. Like, for example, when you're in the grocery store and you're trying to leave, and they put all those wonderful, tempting things that every kid wants, gum or candy or whatever you don't want them to have. And so, I would say to them ahead of time, this is what we're going to do. And, when we go to check out, there's going to be a lot of things there, but please do not ask because I'm not going to buy anything. But I am going to buy a treat, or I'm buying chocolate chips and I'm going to make cookies, or I would let them know. And it takes a lot of words. It really does. It's so much easier to throw them in the car and let's go and be done. Or, get someone over to watch the kids. But the kids knew ahead of time. And I remember one time we went into a really busy place where there was glass. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So we stood outside and I really wanted to go in because my mom was with us. And it was, I don't even remember what the store was, but I said to the kids, when we walk in, you can either put your hands in your pockets, because they had, always like to wear things with pockets, or behind your backs, but you may not touch anything, and they would say, well, why? And I said, because it's all glass and it will break, and then we'll have to pay for it. And so we walked in, and the lady behind the counter, like when we were leaving, she was like, oh my gosh, your kids were so great. And they, one of them had their hands in the pocket and the other one behind her back. And, and so, I just said, thank you. And we walked out. But same thing when we would go out to dinner, use your inside voices, or same thing when grandparents came over and were a little bit more elderly. I remember my mother-in-law had a cane. And I would just say to the little children, you cannot run. Grandma's going to be coming in and I don't want you to wipe out grandma. It's just like, we need to be careful. And so they will respect that. And then that's where the issue comes in. If they know what is expected and then they don't follow through. So I think that's really important. Because when you are homeschooling, a lot of times they want to tell you, especially as they're getting older. But I remember like even saying, okay, we're going to have a spelling review, because I would try not to say things like test, or even though my kids didn't care. And well, why do we have to do that? And I don't want to do that. And I didn't study my words, and, on and on. And I would just say, we're not going to discuss it, or we are going to do this, or we'll do 2 times as much, or do you want to write them out 10 times, or, whatever that was. I was quick on my feet, so I could, do things like that. But I just felt like if the kids knew ahead of time that this is what was expected, then it was so much easier. I gave them checklists. That was one way just to keep ahead, so that number 2 for me was have a plan. And one of the plans was a checklist. And on that checklist, there were the items that needed to get covered that day. So it was like a week at a glance on one piece of paper. And this was all my husband's idea. It was really great when we came up with that. And I could keep it for my portfolio. And we had, the kids would put in the date at the top. Every week they'd get a clean sheet. And then they would just check off the things that they did each day. When we would do our group things together, which were always Bible or some kind of, lesson I had that was, a scripture or something we were going to memorize, or some activity that we did. When they got older, they were reading the Bible on their own. And then also they had a journal. And when they got older too, I found like really fun things. No matter what your kids are interested in, there's Bible activity for that. And I remember my kids were into sports, and there was like a sports, like you could read a scripture verse every day, and it had some kind of related sports thing. I just found it in my schoolroom when I was cleaning up the other day. And I thought, I'm going to pull this for Michael, because this was his name was in it. And just, he can give it to his kids someday. But so there were things that they did on their own, and they could do it at the end of the day or at the beginning, whenever they wanted. And so that really helped. And I think having a plan also gave me confidence that I knew what we were going to be covering. And the addition years later was a time, because then you have the child that could take all day doing a math lesson, right? Have you ever had one of those, Crystal?
Yes.
Or can I have a dime for every time, not even a penny, and with the inflation will go to 10 cents, but for every time your child lost a book? I mean, we had our own little schoolroom where they could actually put things in their desk. And they would invariably want to go to school in their room. I remember my daughters would be stuffed underneath. This daughter is also homeschooling now, and her daughter, I overheard, had lost a book. And I said to Christina, I go, who does that sound like? But that was their dad. Again, he and I would talk, and he'd have these great ideas. And he said, well, how long should it take to do a math lesson after you've explained it? Now there's video, and now there's, all this different stuff that they can, learn. And then they do their own little, however many questions that you want them to do. And I would say, well, it should take about 40 minutes to maybe an hour at the most. And so that was in there too, that was the time frame they had to do it, and they had to time themselves. So that kept them on track. And I think those kinds of things are so wonderful, so that you can have that step up and, not fall behind.
Mm-hmm. And I think it helps your children to not feel so overwhelmed. Like I have one that I can just tell her what her assignments are for the entire week, and she'll go do it. She'll have it done by Wednesday just to get it off of her plate. But I also had a child that he just gets completely overwhelmed. And so I always say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's kind of what I would do for my son, is I would break it down into bite-sized chunks. And then he was more able to accomplish that and not feel overwhelmed, because the important thing is that he's learning the material, not that I don't want him to get overwhelmed and hate learning. Learning is supposed to be a lifestyle, and we want them to love learning throughout their entire life. I'm still learning things, but that's because I love to learn. And if they're feeling overwhelmed, then I just think they shut down. So those time markers, I think, are so helpful to us and to our kids.
No, I agree. And the other thing too, when we plan out our day, I tried to have a little bit of time where the kids had time to think. I call it time to think. Sometimes I found out some of the things they did during their time to think that wasn't so great. But it gave them an opportunity to do something that they wanted to do, whether it was reading a book or whether it was exploring something that they were interested in. And it opened up an entire different way of learning. I could never be relaxed enough to be an unschooler. And in the past, I'd interviewed people that were unschoolers very successfully. I mean, kids going into great colleges, and I would just say, you didn't have a plan. Oh no, like they'd wake up one day and say, I'm interested in cooking. And we would just explore that. And I'm like, that is so wonderful. I could not have done that, but kudos, you did great. Wonderful. However, because I also found that even with unschooling, there was planning, a lot of times they talked to their kids ahead of time so they could get things ready to do whatever they were wanting to focus on. But I feel like this was like a little microcosm of that, where it gave the children time to explore. And sometimes we would do brainstorm activities ahead of time and just say, what are some of the things, if you could study anything you wanted, what would that be? Or if you could look into or read anything, and that kind of opened up a lot of doors. And I think that is a challenge today, don't you, with like the inundation of the technology that kids have today?
Oh, for sure. I think it's so easy. It's much easier to put them in front of a gaming system or, in front of the internet to entertain. But that hands-on learning, it goes so much further if you think about it. And my second oldest daughter hated to read, and she and my oldest daughter was my homeschooling experiment. So
I had two of those too. The first two.
I thought, I pulled them out and I thought, what's the worst I could do in a year? So I committed to a year, and here we are all these years later.
How long have you homeschooled, Crystal?
Since the year 2000.
Oh, well, that's right. That's right. You said that. Okay. Wow.
So, it's been a journey, but the way that I got her interested in reading was I found out she had this great love of horses. And so anything horse related, she was all in. So we did everything. I started with books on horses, and I actually started below what her supposed grade level was. And
Mm-hmm.
before long, she was actually reading above grade level because she just wanted more. And we learned science that way and history that way. Who knew that you could learn about history through horses? And then they took
Absolutely.
horseback riding, but we did it through books. There was some things that I would grab online, but I didn't want to set them free online because
Right. I still,
that is such
yeah,
a
even
distraction.
today, yeah, it is. You can go down the rabbit hole, there's just too much out there. And also, being a military family, what did you find, that was a challenge? Because you've got the other aspect of, being at a certain place for a certain amount of time and then you could possibly move. I don't really know how all that works. And so there's the stress in that. So what was your biggest challenge as a military family alongside of homeschooling?
For us, it was really a lack of support. You move to a new place, and it can be so hard to find a support system of like-minded military homeschoolers. And so loneliness can quickly set in, not just for myself, but for my kids. So
Mm-hmm.
we found that it was important to get connected and find our tribe at a new duty station quickly. But getting involved in online communities, that's where the plus side of technology and the
Right.
internet is. It helps bridge the gap between arriving in a new city and getting connected locally, but those local connections are so important.
And I think too that also is a really good point for, um, you know, our topic today, because if you're connected with other people, it kind of keeps you on track. Um, a lot of times, if you're going it alone, those are the families that sometimes don't continue on with their homeschool journey and may just think, I can't do it, or I'm doing a terrible job. And, you second guess all of these other things. Whereas if you're connected and you have that community, you know that other people have the same struggles and maybe how they've, gotten through them and that sort of thing. And that is so helpful. I found out through the community of homeschoolers when I had a child who was really good in sports. This is my third child. Nick was a lefty and just really athletically inclined. And I had no idea what to do with that and how to get him into our local homeschool group was not big enough to have baseball. Like they had basketball and they had soccer and some other things that were community type of sports. And of course, there was a community, center that he played Little League for. But it was through a homeschool friend who told me about getting him to be part of a Christian school. And my son, who's now 26, is one of the coaches, and he's been a coach since he graduated from high school for the same school that he played for. So it's been a really good experience for us as a family to have that local connection too. And I think it kept us on track as a homeschool family, especially when your kids start getting into high school and things like that. And we start panicking and going, oh my gosh, what if they want to go to college? What are we going to do? And I've had out of the 5, 2 did not go to college. And so it was an idea of, okay, so what are you going to do? And what is your job going to be? So focus that way. And the other thing too, is the blessings that homeschooling can bring as a military family. And so do you want to share what that is for you?
Well, for us, really the benefits of homeschooling far outweigh the cons, in my opinion. For our family, I feel that because of homeschooling, we've really grown closer together and have really formed a tight-knit bond. And that's because we've been each other's support through all the military ups and downs, and deployments and PCSs and just trials of everyday life. So I think those family bonds have been by far the biggest blessing. But I also think that homeschooling has opened a door of learning opportunities that, had we been in the civilian community, that we might not have been able to experience in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, when we lived in Hawaii, we learned World War II history at Pearl Harbor and on the island of Oahu, seeing the other historical sites other than just Pearl Harbor, and
Wow.
that the attack really involved the entire island. And then my husband, being a military or a history buff on top of that, would tell us, yeah, these bullet holes that are still in some of the buildings on Wheeler Airfield, that is from the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
It was the whole island. And each duty station really has a whole is field trips galore that we would not have thought to visit. If you're just traveling and you're a tourist, you're going to see the more touristy areas. But when you live there and you're only going to be there a short period of time, we make the most of it, and we go to all the museums and all the out of the way places that most people wouldn't go visit unless you're a local. But we get to be locals at all these different places.
That's
every
wonderful.
2 or 3 years. We're local somewhere else. So
Right. That's wonderful. And then, I loved the idea of opening the door for more opportunities, because when you homeschool, you can add those field trips in. I will tell you that if you're a go-getter homeschool mom, you're probably organizing it and gathering all the people together, but that's okay. There's seasons for everything. I was that mom for many years, and then passed on that tradition to others. Like we did things like science fairs, which I also helped to host and everything, and then pass that on. Your kids can pursue sports and that, have more time to practice lessons. If I had friends whose kids were like amazing violinists, and the first thing they did was practice their violin every day. So that was like their first thing that they did. You mentioned horseback riding. I know my kids did that as well. Each of them, I think poor Michael, he was at the end and he was too little for his own horse. So he had to be led around. And he still complains about that, because by the time he was ready, everyone had moved on to something else. And then he was playing baseball during the summer. So there's different things that you can do and opportunities. I remember one time we took tennis lessons, and we actually had a coach that worked with my friend and I. This was her idea, not mine, because I was not a tennis player at that point in time. I was more into thinking you hit the ball really hard, learned that was not what you do. So she would work with us and then work with the kids. And the lessons were much cheaper than we would have been able to afford just for private lessons if we had just done it alone. So, there are so many opportunities that do open up. And again, having a plan, being able to fit these things in. Some of them happen organically. Someone may call you and say, hey, what do you think? But that is such a wonderful thing. And, I know as a military mom, you have had situations where dad is gone. And I know that has to be hard, even if you're not a military mom. Dad's gone most of the day working. Most dads are. My husband owns a construction company, and at one point in time, he could be gone from 5:30 to 4:30. And that was nice when he was gone a lot earlier. And then as time went on, and he worked and he had different jobs, sometimes he would leave at 7 and not be home till 5, and then maybe have to meet with people afterwards, or, so there were situations where, I was taking kids to homeschooling, taking kids to lessons, then, having dinner alone with, the kids, and he would eat later whenever he got home. So it was difficult. And yet my husband came home, and you're in a situation where your husband, was deployed. So how did that work out? And how did you keep your family, focused and together? Because I know that had to have been hard.
Well, each time looks a little bit different because sometimes it's deployments that may last 6 to 9 months without an R&R, or a TDY that may be 3 weeks, and or we'll say just 3 weeks or just a few months,
So what's the TDI?
TDY is
Oh,
temporary duty.
Okay. All right.
So I'm sure that I don't have the acronym completely correct, but so they may just be going to another duties or like a military
Okay.
base to work, but they're still gone away from home. So, but each time looks a little different. And my best advice is to listen to your kids and to yourself. And that's something that it took a while for me to learn, because I would get kind of down when my husband would have to leave for an extended period of time. And I just learned to listen to my kids if they are struggling. I try to keep as much of a normal routine as possible, because I feel like it passes time, it makes time pass a little more quickly.
If you're busy, right. Yeah.
And it also gives our kids stability. And that's when it goes back to the plan that you were talking about. It gives us stability. They feel, and they feel just like they just have that, it's a comfort zone, I guess you could say.
Well, they have a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And a goal. And yeah, that's wonderful. Right. Yeah.
So I think sticking to as much of a normal routine as possible helps. But if one of your kids are struggling with dad's absence, that may be a good time to get out and be more active in the community. It could just be going on more frequent field trips or trips to the library. Even young children can volunteer with you sometimes, some places,
Mm-hmm.
so you might look into different volunteer opportunities, or even area churches, or on a lot of military bases. We know that families are going to be separated from, through deployments and such. So we often have a lot of family activities. So look into different, like Moms and Me, and MOPS, and PWOC and CWOC, which is Protestant Women of the Chapel, or Catholic Women of the Chapel, and just get involved that way. Some of the things I've done, though, is we'll just up and travel to visit family or friends somewhere. When you're a military family, you make friends all over. So we'll go travel and make it an adventure. And something that we couldn't do when dad's home, we want to be there when he gets home, and not use up all his leave for our adventures. So we'd just take off and go visit family and friends. So the key is to be flexible and remain as positive as possible, because your kids will mirror you. So you don't want to be delusional. You want to know that it's recognize and validate in your children. It's a tough time. It's okay to cry, or even be angry, and let your kids cry, and let them be angry sometimes, but then dry up those tears and then go have some fun.
I think that's wonderful. And that's, one of the things I did have as a point here too is, I had a friend who used to say, well, learning isn't fun. And because one of my books was teaching science and having fun. And she was just saying, well, I'd love you, but that's just such a bad title, because learning should be, disciplined and organized and not fun. And I was always like, if it is fun, then it is going to be something that has, sticking power, because I would give my children, like, just for some a fun activity, if we were studying something and it was a difficult topic, let's say that day, and I would give the little ones, especially loved the baking soda and vinegar, little activity where you're going to have explosions, because what's not fun about exploding a baggie or inflating a balloon or doing all of these other little things you can do with baking soda and vinegar. And so you could have these little breaks of activities that are going to still keep you on track, but you're going to say, okay, when we finish this, whatever that is, it may be a struggle. Then you're going to get to do something fun. And I would have these planned ahead of time, it wasn't just having to come up with on a whim. And so that was really important to me. And it's exactly what you were saying too, with taking that break and having that, other thing, in that case, it was a good distraction. But I also want to warn parents against, to stay ahead. We want to look at those other distractions. One of the things for moms, especially that get us off track, it would be social media is one big distraction. And that's today's distraction. Whereas before it used to be the phone. Like nobody really talks on the phone anymore. I've got a computer where I can even text, if you have the same variety of device, I can just text you on my computer, and that's even more dangerous than trying to do it or even voice message. But those are distractions that take you away from your focus, which is getting school done. And so one of the things, was probably, if I had to say, this is one of the best keys or advice I have for parents, is to let other people know, for example, family members or friends and so forth, so that let's say that somebody sends you a text and says, hey, do you have a minute to talk? And you let those people know ahead of time, we're doing school from 7 until 2. My kids had the goal of getting done by noon. That wasn't always possible, especially when they got older. And it was like, oh no, we have to school after lunch. How terrible. Woe is to me, or even though we live on some acreage here, if they were schooling when that bus, like they could see kids walking down the street, if they were still having to do school when those kids got home from school, that was like another fate worse than death. Okay. For my kids set their own goals, And so those were things that, I would just say to them, we have to stay focused, and this is the time we're schooling. It was a rough blend of, getting done in 4 to 5 hours or whatever that was. You can get done earlier. That's great. And if you stay focused and quit losing your books, that will happen. Quit getting up and sharpening your pencil. Or I remember my oldest son saying at one point, I am so glad I am not in school, because I wouldn't be able to have a glass of water with me at all times and a pencil sharpener, because he had to have his pencil super sharp. So, that can also, again, prepping, letting people know, telling yourself too, because I found out with myself, I try not to check emails when I'm busy. Otherwise the rule goes out the window. But if I have something I have to get done, I don't check emails till early afternoon, because otherwise I'll just start with an email and then look at this news thing, and then that other thing came up. And so, do you feel like that too, that sometimes you've got to stay focused or give yourself a parameter of when you need to get things done?
Oh, for sure. I think another distraction can be friendships or activities out of the home. And one of the things that I did early on, thankfully, and this was wisdom from my mom, is to limit how many activities that I put my kids in, because I could easily be going every single day and not have enough time to get priorities done. And priorities matter. And then I also make a list. I have my top 3 priorities for the day, and then my other things that I need to get done. But if I get these 3 done, and I do that for the kids too, if they get the basics done,
I love that.
That's great. Yeah. If we have to shelve some other things for another day or something, and give yourself permission to stay home. I think we're in a society that feels we have to be out and about all the time. But give yourself permission to stay home. You don't have to go out all the time, and you can stay home. You're not being lazy. And if you've made your home a haven, then being home is a blessing. And so those are kind of the ways that I've combat that and still work on that over the years.
That's so true. Out of my 5, I have only one, I think, that is not a homebody. And that's my second child that has all the little ones. Her husband always says when she's pregnant, that's the only time she's too worn out to go somewhere. but yeah, she's one that likes the activities and the friends and so forth. And yet she's got all of her little ones in one activity, which I think is really interesting. Instead of having them spread out, they're different levels. But I think that's important too, because as homeschoolers, you can also take on too much with volunteering. And I think in that same vein of permission to stay home, you can volunteer, take one thing that you're doing and then skip a year. Because what happens is, oh, you're homeschooling. Well, you can do this for the church, or you can do that because your kids are not in school, or you're a stay-at-home mom, which some people think that means you do nothing. So there's a lot. I mean, I'm no longer homeschooling, and there's still, if I told you what I've already done today, it's a lot of stuff. And so I think people don't realize that, especially that are not in the same position that we're in. And so that's one of the things I will say, it's important to talk to your husband too, and be on the same page with them, because my husband helped me realize that I didn't have to be in charge of everything and do everything. And there was a season where I did that. And then it was time to, say, okay, I'm not going to do it. And now I have no trouble saying no. So, although my husband and I do work with newly engaged couples at our church, but that has been a really fun blessing that both of us can do to share our faith with them. And as they're starting their, journey toward getting married, and we've been married a long time. So, I feel like that's like, as I was saying that, I'm going, but you're volunteering for, the pre-marriage counseling kind of thing. And so we do it in an unofficial capacity, but, more under the church, but also at the request of our pastor. So, these are things I think as you grow and learn with your family that you can adapt things. And I think, keeping on track for the year, having a beginning, middle, and end. If I remember, folks, if not, check out my podcast for it. You can just search for it. But I have 3 podcasts that I did that gives you a checklist as a parent that you can ask yourself, how am I doing at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year? And the middle one, the middle year homeschool check is probably the best one. And that was, again, a point in time when I had been working on my business, and we just launched another book, and, there's promotion and all these other things that, are going on at that time. And I remember saying to my husband, I don't really think I'm even getting anything accomplished. And he goes, well, check and see if you are, and come up with a checklist. I'm like, oh, great idea for a podcast. So I did. And that really helped me a lot. And then I could say, okay, this is the area that we need to work on, and get that in the flow. And then, because I know some parents will do like really strong focus on history for some weeks, and then they'll switch to science. Whereas I didn't like doing that. I wanted to have, I can't not do it. But so I would do, maybe 3 days a week, we would focus on the history for that day, and then 2 days a week of science for that 1 week. And then the next week we would do 3 days of science and 2 of history. That made me happy, and then my kids happy. So that was easier for me to maintain. And it's too, when the kids get interested in something, it's hard to switch a subject. I don't know if you've ever found that when you're really into something, okay, put away your books. Now we're going to do, some other thing. So doing that, especially with history and science, gave us more of a block of time to be able to do it. So, anyway, any thoughts on that, or any last thoughts that you want to share with our listeners today?
I would just, one thing I was thinking of is the power of no. Just as a woman, I think many of us are nurturers and people pleasers, and we don't want to say no. And it's striking a balance. I mean, it really, in the end, is all about balance, in different seasons of life. I learned from a chaplain wife friend of mine early on. She says, I know you want to do all the things, but this may not be your season for that thing. And I think as moms, we want to do all the things that, we want to make these special memories with our kids and be Pinterest moms, but we can't be and do all the things, so whatever your season of life is that you're in, and just embrace that and do your best that you can there, whatever the Lord is leading you to do during that season. And that's enough. God
Amen.
will work all that out, and your kids will learn, and they will grow, and they will be good citizens. Just do what the Lord is calling you to do, and know that that's enough. Leave the results up to God.
And something I want to piggyback on that. And don't let me forget, I want people to be able to like how to contact you, but I want to leave that for the end. But something really funny. So as a homeschool mom, I was very confident, have a background in education. I can do this, right? Well, there were certain topics I didn't like or didn't want to cover. And so my daughter, the history major in college, tells her professor that she had selected one of the world wars. I don't remember which one to do a paper on. And so the teacher said, well, why are you selecting this topic? And like she had to fill this out and submit it to her professor. So she writes down, because I was homeschooled and my mother hated war, and so she didn't cover this topic. I was like, way to throw me under the bus, girlfriend. And so it wasn't that I didn't cover it. I didn't cover it. Okay. They knew the reason behind it and what the outcome was. And we read, whatever the little bit was in a textbook kind of a thing, but we didn't delve into it because I didn't like the whole aspect. Whereas she loves like the whole nuances of it and the strategy behind it and the why and the focus and so forth, so on. I mean, she's now a high school history teacher and a coach and in a wonderful, wonderful Christian school. we could not have handpicked it better if we tried. So it's a real blessing for Anne, but she's teaching world history. But I thought it was so funny because she ended up getting an A in that class. And afterwards, the professor called her on it and said to her, well, obviously your mom didn't do such a horrible job schooling you because you were one of my best and favorite students, and this was at a very liberal school that we didn't even know was that liberal, but at the time where she got a big scholarship. So what I'm saying is, parents, if you forget or don't like to teach a subject and you haven't done a very good job, your child will still excel if that's something they're interested in, and they will blame you. Let me tell you, when you get a little bit older, well, you never taught us that. And so I would say to them, no, but you had the availability to learn things if you wanted to. So there is that. I did have a child, and this is my youngest, who did not think that he knew Algebra 2 well enough. So he asked me to order him a curriculum for the summer. And so I would just say, who but a homeschool child would do that, right? And I remember calling, I liked chalk dust. And so I remember calling the company, and I had been a speaker at conference. And so I knew one of the presenters, Dana, I think does most of the video, and his brother works with him. So I called in the office and I talked to his brother and I said, do I get an award for the parent who probably, because I had used him with my oldest, who probably has ordered, from you the longest? And he goes, what is your name? And he looked me up in the computer, goes, oh my gosh, you did order from us. So he actually said, oh, I've got a scratch and dent set here. Do you want me to send you that? So he sent the book and at that point the DVDs, because I don't even know that they were streaming back then. But it's like your kids will let you know if it's something that they're interested in. And, he was concerned with trying to get into some kind of engineering that, he wasn't going to have, and he didn't remember it enough or felt like he learned it enough. So they'll let you know. And especially like you said too, I think early on, with giving kids a love of learning. And that's the best we can do as parents.
Right. When they love to learn, then they will learn all their life.
Absolutely. And I think we're still learning, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how can people contact you? For one thing, definitely listen to Crystal's podcast, the two of them, the Military Homeschool Podcast.com. And then the other one, the historyforchristianteens.com. And yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, and if you want to email me, you can reach me at Crystal Niehoff, that's spelled Niehoff @gmail.com. Or you can also get me at either one of those email or podcast name addresses. So for instance, historyforchristianteens@gmail.com or military homeschool podcast @gmail.com. And then you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, it has been such a pleasure having you on, Crystal, and you are such a blessing. It has been wonderful getting to know you and working with you on your podcast, as well as, you sharing and helping me through my journey as a new, military enlisted mom. And so, Michael, I don't know if I mentioned it in this one, but he is a second lieutenant in the Army. And he'll report the end of July 2022. So everyone, please keep him in your prayers, keep me in your prayers, and blessing on all of our military men and women. And so thank you again, Crystal, for coming on.
Well, thanks so much for having me on your show. It has been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. And friends, if you want today's show notes, please go to vintagehomeschoolmoms.com and you can look for episode 475. And the topic today was homeschool Head Start military families. And please share this episode with a friend. All you have to do is, either share the URL from the podcast at Vintage Homeschool Moms or go on your favorite podcast app and give us a star rating. That really helps us to get found. And we appreciate all of your help and even dropping us notes and comments on each of these podcasts. You can do that on the comment section on the website. So everyone, take care. God bless. And I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and thevintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.